Observe.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 30 of the Observe and Rapport show. I'm Kyle Brennan, joined as ever by my beautiful co-host, Keith Sullivan. Keith, how are we doing today?
This country is fucked, pal.
I always start on a positive note.
It's so fucked. Oh, come on. These are ridiculous. Hold on. Yeah, there we go.
Get that figured out.
What's flavor? Coffee?
It's a coffee flavor.
Crazy
Yeah.
how much. I need the beer to like wash it down.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I have a mustache. That's
Yeah,
new.
mustache looks good. I'm growing the beard back.
You look great.
Yeah.
You're one of those, you have a face, you look good, like a little shitty. Like when you're too cut nice, you look a
Yeah.
little like mannequin. Or a little like...
I've got like the crimson chin.
yes,
It's
like
too
you were
sharp.
built in a lab or
It's like
something.
the mask.
Yeah.
You know, the mask chin.
Yeah. Yes,
Carrey?
you have
Yeah.
a good mask chin. The mask chin, yeah.
Even my wife says that. She's like, you need the beard. It makes you look nicer.
Yeah, it's for some reason, right?
Yeah.
And when I have the beard, which is why I have the mustache now, it gets like, I don't know why, but my hair grows out like parallel to the floor. But it has to get super long before it comes down.
It's got to fall.
It looks so stupid. So yeah, this country's fucked, man. I mean, we're going on what, the third assassination attempt on this guy?
I also just love your look. I love your look right now. You got like a trucker hat.
This country's
mustache,
fucked.
and a beard. I tell you what, brother.
But it is. It really is. But like, okay, I say that, but it's really the people who are fucked. I'm reading this book. I can't wait to get into it. Not necessarily right away.
You can go into it right away.
Okay. There's this book I'm reading, recommended by Tim Dillon, called Democracy Incorporated. Okay.
Recent or old?
It came out in 2008. So written by this guy, Sheldon Wolin, who was a political theorist and regular writer on contemporary politics. He was a professor of politics at Princeton University for many years. Graduated from Harvard, he got his doctorate from Harvard. Very educated guy.
We get it, yeah.
Very educated. Well, I got to tell you, because like, I want to give why this has merit.
It reminded me, have you ever seen the clip of like when Tiger Woods is teeing off at a tournament and they're listing
And
like,
feels like, all right,
yeah,
all right.
we get it.
Brilliant. So a very educated man wrote this book called Democracy Incorporated. And it's about how America really isn't a democracy. Like it's really not. And I know that there's this like new popularized opinion that, you know, with regard to the voting process, the fact that there's an electoral college, right? Like people in the respect that you can be a far right Republican living in a blue state, right? So your vote really won't have much of a influence on the outcome of any given election, probably, because you live in a blue state and the electoral college handles those things from there.
Right.
And in that respect, we're not a democracy. We're an electoral republic, right? Because your vote really, it has little to no effect on the election. But besides that, this book is about how America fundamentally isn't a democracy anymore. It was, originally that was the intention, but it hasn't been for a very long time.
Does he argue that's more of like a corporatocracy, if that's the term
You can
he
call
uses?
it that, but he coined this new term in I keep saying 20 because it's been the 20s for so long, but in 2003, I think he came up with this term, the inverted totalitarianism.
Not a sexy name.
Not hot. Like I say, he's
Not
very
catchy.
educated.
I like corporatocracy.
So
a little
he's
bit.
actually, when I said he's a writer on contemporary politics, he wrote a lot of articles and essays and all these things, but they weren't really for the public. They were for other intellectuals, other academics, other scholars to read, right? Very smart guy. And anyway,
inverted totalitarianism.
Inverted totalitarianism. So he goes into this idea that he has about how America, like you said, is kind of like a corporate kleptocracy, right? Like it's based on the model of a corporation and all of these things. And when you're at work, you don't have democratic say in a lot of decisions that get made for the corporation, right? So you can think about it that way. He doesn't make that case, but it's very similar to that. So basically his argument is that in a classically totalitarian regime, the revolutionary process and like the revolutionary stage of that happening is like the regime will overthrow the current structure or the current system. In America, what happens is people take advantage and exploit the laws and the principles of the democratic system, right? And in doing so, they overthrow the original intention of the democracy. So like, people like, going through loopholes, legal loopholes, things like that. That's the revolutionary part of it. And he argues that happened in like the early 1900s. Also with like the economy, like in Nazi Germany, there was this overtaking of the economic actors within the country, and the military and the government started to control everything economically. Whereas here, there's this process of lobbying, political donations, and the revolving door you hear about. You ever hear about that in Washington, the revolving door?
I assumed when you brought up just the name of the book, they were going to talk a lot about lobbying.
Yeah, lobbyists and political donations and stuff like that, and contributions and all that. And the revolving door, if you don't know what that is basically like, it's this thing that happens in Washington where a lot of lobbyists become legislators and a lot of legislators become lobbyists, and it's this kind of like circle jerk for like these guys' entire
you scratch
careers.
My back, I'll scratch yours.
Right, exactly. It goes on, and like whatever we want, the people, has nothing to do with what they get done. And this is the part that's important, like the people, right? The population. So in a classically totalitarian regime, the goal or the aim is political mobilization, right? Like the Hitler Youth, for example, a lot of like young kids fully into Hitler, or the German Girls, I think was the name of like the female version of that. Whereas in America, the goal is political apathy, like basically through propaganda here and there, but also the fact that we only have one responsibility as citizens now, which is the voting every 4 years. No one takes it, like for the longest time until recently, no one really took that very seriously. So there's this like feeling of hopelessness that gets kind of like infiltrated into and people just go, well, what's the point?
Right.
Like, what's the point of even trying? I don't even care anymore. Just let them take care of it. And that's like this inverted version of the same thing. Like, we have no say. We have no say at all. So like, go ahead.
No, it's interesting because I've been listening to a lot of podcasts about very similar subjects, and obviously every podcast now that it's leading up to November of 2024.
Right. That's why I'm on this
book.
Is
like politically kind of involved in some way. So lobbying I've been hearing a lot about, and it seems to me just like such a dirty and corrupt system, but it's also legal. So like it is, like you said, a way that people found a way to influence through the incentives of the legal loophole, which is lobbying. And the biggest by far lobbying category is pharmaceutical industry, which we talked about in depth on the last episode. So I won't belabor that point, but like pharmaceutical is like, I don't know the numbers, but I saw a chart, and like pharmaceuticals was like the bar graph. It was like off the bar graph sheet, and then next there's like oil, and there's I actually think the second one was like manufacturing, maybe like one that you just don't even think about. But there was a few on there, but pharmaceuticals was by far. And that to me is just such a way that, it's sort of almost like intimidation in a way. Sure. It's either intimidation or a promise of a future like package of some sort. Right. Which is when you see a lot of these politicians who, make a nominal salary, like maybe $150,000 a year. As soon as they leave office, all of a sudden their net worth skyrockets. Right. So it's kind of these like, hey, pass this bill or say yes to this one or vote no against this one during your, 6-10 years in Congress.
Correct.
And once you're out, we'll take care of you.
Yeah. And like you said, it's corruption, but for whatever reason in this culture, it's just viewed as normal. But it's corruption.
Well, it's like, because it's transparent. Because like me and you are openly just talking about this on a podcast and not afraid of any repercussions, right? So we're allowed to talk about it, but it's also, everyone kind of sees it blatantly now. Yeah. But it's also like that apathy of like, okay, well, what am I going to do about it? If I vote for the red guy, if I vote for the blue guy, is anything really going to change in the lobbying system? No. Which I think what I've also been hearing about is like this term populist, which I never understood, and I always felt through growing up. The term populist always came in a negative light. It's like, he's a populist candidate, and like they say it in a bad way. And I was always like, I remember Googling what populist meant when I was like younger. And I was like, oh, it just means someone that everyone likes. They agree with the people, like with the common person.
And that's like it's bad.
And I'm like, why is that a bad thing?
Right.
But a populist is basically a threat to the establishment, right? Because a populace is basically listening to people like you or I, or discussions like we're having right now about, isn't lobbying, corrupt, and isn't the fact that politicians can trade in the stock market corrupt? And a populist is going like, yeah, it is.
Yeah.
And is saying it out loud and is running on that platform. So everyone is like, well, he's the populist candidate and we can't have that, because it sort of signifies revolt in a way.
Right.
Where it's saying, hey, I don't like where this is going.
Yep.
And I'm listening to the people who in a democracy are, the leaders of the country effectively. And I'm trying to listen to them and implement it into our government.
Right.
Which is the will of the people and how it should work.
Right. And like, I like that it's called inverted totalitarianism, because inverted definitionally means it can mean upside down or the wrong way, and that it should be. And you do get this feeling that people say the world's upside down. The world's just completely flipped upside down. And it's like, yeah, it really has. But like actually, and then the book actually opens up with George Bush, the Bush administration. And the book isn't necessarily a critique of the Bush administration, but it is in that, since 9/11, America's just adopted this responsibility of preemptive war. Like the fact that we think we have the right to declare war on something before it's actually a problem.
Right. That was the whole war on terror. Which
exactly
allowed for the Patriot Act and what Snowden kind of enlightened. It was like, well, in order to protect our citizens from terrorism, from another 9/11,
yes,
we need to implement all these sorts of security measures. And in the wake of 9/11, we were all like, yeah, absolutely.
We were completely on board
do whatever you got to do.
Yeah.
And similar to like the COVID lockdowns where
preemptive
people started to be like, well, wait, once you do this, you're not going to step it back, because we saw what happened with the Patriot Act and that. And I think, after 9/11, when they started saying everything was a threat to national security or something, we sort of accepted it. And then as the years went on, by 2008 or 2012, 2015, people are like, well, all right, seems like we got the terrorism thing kind of under control.
Yeah.
Why do we need to go to these, random countries like Libya or something and
Syria
and preemptively sort of stop, non-democratic
this
countries
threat to democracy, right? So he says that preemptive war always gets, the public opinion on the side of it by having some sort of slogan attached to it, right? Like it's a threat to democracy. We have to stop terrorism.
What was the axis of evil?
Right. Yeah. We have to, and the thing is that the terrorism thing, it's one of those like, it doesn't really have a location. It doesn't really have a necessary target even. It's just terrorism. We need to stop terrorism, right?
And now,
sorry to cut you
off.
No, please.
I was going to say now that phrase is, especially in the political election with the candidates, is threat to democracy.
Yeah, and you keep hearing it. Threat to democracy, threat to democracy. It's a threat to democracy.
And really, like, the biggest threat to democracy, I was just listening to a podcast with Naval Ravikant, who I love listening to. He was like, once the government starts tampering with the justice system, he goes, that is the biggest threat to democracy. Because once you start to see the person in power use their influence to change the justice system to attack their political opponents, now you've almost broken the whole system. And he goes, that is, like, to me, one of the biggest steps towards the fall of a democracy.
Yep.
And it's exactly what we're seeing now with the fact that people are saying, whether you like him or hate him, Trump being in office is a threat to democracy, so therefore we must attack him through the judicial system.
Yep.
People don't realize that, like, okay, sure, you want to, I understand you don't want the guy to run, but this can be used against you. It sets that precedent that, okay, once you enact sort of a corrupt power over the justice system, the only logical response is revenge.
Yeah.
And it's going to come back to bite you in the exact way that you used it.
Yeah. So it's a very interesting time in that this book is kind of like, it's reached this breaking point where people have realized what this book is talking about without reading the book. You know what I mean? And like, it's just so obvious now. And, he goes into like the establishment in general of like how in America, like you said, the corporate kleptocracy, like a lot of the people who run are like, just, they ran successful corporations, like they're businessmen, and so they know the structure already of how this is supposed to work and even Donald Trump, like he's a businessman But
yeah, you saw like Andrew Yang get in. You saw Vivek Ramaswamy get in.
Who did Obama beat again?
Mitt Romney.
Mitt Romney. Yeah, he ran Bain Capital for all those years. Like he talks about how there's the imaginary. Now the imaginary, it's a term that is used in sociology a lot, and it just describes like the basic beliefs, the basic core values, the laws that any given society runs on. The imaginary. Now there's the constitutional imaginary, which is like, hey, like constitutionally we're a democracy and everybody's vote should count and everybody's voice should be heard. But then there's the power imaginary, which is these two conflicting things that go on in America. And the power imaginary has completely overthrown the constitutional imaginary at this point. Like it's constantly we're losing our rights. Every year the list gets shorter.
What's an example of like the power imaginary?
So like, for example, the effort to expand your power globally like we do with American imperialism by, attaching a name or a threat to any given endeavor. Like when we got involved in Vietnam, right? Like to stop communism, or we got involved in the Middle East to stop terrorism, or we mandated vaccinations to stop the virus. Like all of these power incentives, and they completely overthrow the constitutional incentive.
It's the ones where they sort of take advantage of a scary or fearful thing, so that we will sort of be like, yes, yeah, of course, like do whatever you got to do.
Yep. And they use fear. It's always a fear-based thing, a virus, terrorism, communism, whatever it is. But it just gives us this right to get involved in things that we're not really have anything to do with, and the people probably don't even care about this problem, but yet, we send our sons and daughters to go die in these wars for these people. I mean, it's the war pigs thing, and this has been going on for decades, right? Like, but this book, it's eye-opening in that it everything has a name, and it does blow my mind that two things that we can, like you said, just kind of openly talk about these things. Weirdly, I mean, I almost got thrown off TikTok for talking about Big Pharma, but that's okay. But
yeah, wild,
so crazy. But also, there's this, I've talked about this before, this relationship between the extreme ends of any given spectrum, right? Like there's totalitarianism, classic totalitarianism, and then there's inverted totalitarianism. And like, it's two things that are completely different, like in their processes, but they ultimately are the same thing. And it's like when Dr. Evil says to Austin Powers, we're not so different, you and I, and it's funny. That is like an inceptually deep thing because they are the same actor in the movie. Oh, yeah. And like, it's kind of cool like that. Right. So I don't know. It's a great book though. It's very, I like how Chris Williamson says he likes to put like a quote to every anecdote or whatever he believes in.
Like a quippy, sort of like, aphorism or something.
Yes. And putting names to these things that are blatantly obviously happening in our culture, it really helps solidify your thoughts.
I like when things sort of have like razors, that term.
Sure.
For people who might not know it, a razor is basically like a principle or a rule. The reason it's called a razor is sort of like a way to simplify a complicated issue into like a one sentence principle.
Yeah.
So like Occam's razor is the principle that states basically the simplest solution is usually preferable over the more complex one. Mm-hmm. So if you lost your keys, the simple solution is probably, they're probably in my jeans pocket versus
the refrigerator or something.
Yeah. So it's usually like, I like those little razors and stuff. And it's also, I love reading books like that. About, because I always get in this discussion with people when I tell them I'm a big reader, and I feel like inevitably, a majority of the time, the people I talk to are mostly fiction readers.
Yeah.
Right? Because I get it. Most people, when they want to read, they're looking to like escape and like not think about the problems of the world. Like they have a stressful work day. They just want to kick back and read about fucking,
escape something.
Dragons and warriors and like, the space and stuff like that. So I get it. But for me, reading is exactly what you just kind of alluded to, which is like sort of giving me a new perspective or understanding of something that I previously just never paid attention to or took for granted entirely.
Yes.
So like books like Democracy Inc., some books I've read recently that have kind of given me that same sort of perspective shift. We're Amusing Ourselves to Death by Neil Postman, which is about like how media influences culture over time, whether it's the printing press or TV or radio. What's Our Problem by Tim Urban, which is a book he wrote. It's an only ebook version, but it basically explains like the rise of wokeism, the rise of Trump, the rise of like recent political ideologies and thoughts. Is really cool. But yeah, just reading books like those to me is the most exciting part of reading. Yeah. It's kind of like watching a documentary.
Exactly.
Where, like, when you watch a documentary like Jiro Dreams of Sushi or something, or Food Inc., like those stay with you for the rest of your life. Like you never forget like the one crazy fact, right? Yeah. You never forget. You always have one interesting fact that you say at a party when you're like trying to fill conversation. A documentary, one thing always sticks with you. And for me, books are sort of my like extension of documentaries, where I find some mind expanding, like, holy shit, I never thought about it that way.
It's that moment when you're reading the book and you come across the sentence or the paragraph and you're like, that's why I read. Yeah. Because of that right there. And you close it maybe even for a second, you go, that is going to stick with me forever. Every book I've read, even bad ones, there's always something in them. Mm-hmm. Like even if it's a fiction book, there's something in there that you're like, okay, that's going to stay in here forever.
Like the quote I said to you last weekend when I was reading Thomas Sowell.
Oh.
And he was talking about like politics and like abortion and like making decisions on really complex issues. And the quote that just like made me literally drop the book and just look up and like laugh. He goes, "There are no solutions. There are only trade-offs."
Yes. And for some reason we went to the Giant game or whatever, and that you've said that so many times, right?
Because it's true in every aspect.
I forget exactly what aspect of my life made that stand out, but I was like, maybe I was like listening to a podcast and they were talking about abortion or something like you're talking about, and I was like, there really are no solutions. Like you can take that to like, okay, I'm not going to eat carbs at this meal. Later you'll be like, oh, I didn't have carbs, so I'll have, pizza for dinner. Like you didn't really it's just a trade-off. You didn't really do much. You just kind of traded it for, it's whether you're trading it for another problem or trading it for a later date. There's really no solutions. And I was like, wow, is that why it's almost like why that expression exists? The more things change, the more they stay the same. Like people are constantly trying to change everything, solve problems, whatever, but nothing really changes. Yeah, ultimately,
the quote to me, like simplified, is basically. I mean, it's
already simple.
It's already a simple quote, but I guess to make it more complex or a layer deeper, it's there's no inconsequential decision.
Yes, there's always something that you're giving up, whatever decision, giving up,
whether
or
you're choosing to go away to school or to stay local. Like, there's no right decision, but there's going to be a consequence of either positive or negative, and you can't control that.
Yeah.
You can never make the right decision. You can only make the best decision.
Yeah. That could be yours. You know.
I remember reading George W. Bush's biography called Decision Points, where he talks about like I think the 7 major decisions he had to make while in office. And I remember him saying like a president, by the time something comes to the president's desk in the Oval Office, he goes, my cabinet and team has already thought of every possible solution there is. When it gets to my desk, it means they haven't found the best solution, and they need me to make what he called the least bad solution. Right. So he was like, I might get 3 different options, and they all suck, but I have to choose the least bad one, or the one that might have the lowest amount of trade-offs negatively. Yeah. So, like, to me, when I read that, even a biography of a president, it also, even though you can have really heated debates about presidential decisions, it gave me like, oh, I'm going to give the president a little benefit of the doubt when they make some headline decision. Yeah. Because I'm like, I know from reading George Bush's 7 biggest decisions, like he didn't have like a bad intention, or he didn't have like, he's not an evil person. No. He just had to make a fucking shitty decision out of 10 other shitty decision options. Yeah. and he could have chosen another one that might have been even worse. So it's like you got to give a little bit of benefit of the doubt.
It's an impossible job, right? There is this element to American culture, and maybe it's baked into us from when we're kids, where we just kind of go like, well, what are you going to do, right? Like that's a white people expression. What are you going to do, you know? And at a certain point, though, you know, like these people who, like I know that Trump just went viral or whatever. I mean, he is always viral, but like the cats and dogs thing, right? Which was absolutely fucking unhinged, right?
My
like
God,
and I mean, when I watched that, man, I literally was like, oh God. When he said, look, they're eating the dogs, okay? They're eating cats. I was like, oh my God, because like first of all, it's nearly baseless because apparently that's not true. That woman who was caught in that video was like an American. Her name was like Alexis something, and she was not Haitian or whatever. But like the point is that people from Springfield, Ohio, are they're not talking about that at all, but they are talking about the influx of Haitian immigration in their city, and like they're like this one woman was like, I have men who don't speak English on my front lawn, like throwing things at me, like yelling at me. I just don't know what to do. Like, what am I to do? And like the thing is, you can't do anything about it. Like you can move, I guess, or you can, like it's Ben Franklin talks about the illusion of freedom, right? Like we have all these choices, right? You can move. You have a passport. You can just fly to another state or fly to another country and like live there. But that doesn't necessarily mean that everything is okay, you know? Like things are still happening that you don't like and that you wouldn't want. As a member of a democracy, you'd think you have a say in the people who come to your town and how your town is run, but you don't.
I will say the beauty of the United States in particular is like, yeah, we complain about all the different things that are going on a day-to-day basis, and we have every right to. The beauty of the U.S. is the fact that we have like the state and versus federal system. Yeah. So like you do have that degree of freedom. If you don't like the laws in New York,
you can move.
You can move to another state, and again, trade-offs. You're not in New York, or you're not like a place that you want to be, but like you get whatever version of freedom that you were looking for that you couldn't get in New York. So like that's a very unique aspect of the country, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
And I remember like I work with a ton of Brits, and one was just saying like it's so cool how like you can literally drive 10 minutes over a state line, and like they'll have completely different laws about random things, whether it's guns or alcohol sales or driving or like or taxes.
Yeah.
He's like, it's pretty wild when you think about it.
It is.
And I was like, yeah,
It is.
I guess I don't really like appreciate that sometimes.
I don't. I know, but I'm beginning to wonder, and maybe this book's just filling my head. You know, I don't know, because like, look, as I go on about this, I'm an American. I wouldn't rather live in any other country. I love this place, but it's like George Carlin said though. Like, it's like I love the freedoms we used to have, right? Like it's that, you know, and we do have freedom, but like not totally. You know, like I can't talk about anything I want on the internet. I can't, and we say you can move, but most people can't actually. They don't have the funds. They don't have the connections in another state. They work in this state, and it's a localized job, and they have to be there present. Like, so again, it's this inverted version of the same thing in that, oh, you could, but you actually can't, can you? And so a lot of people can't.
Yeah.
You know, and look, and it's a balance between, you can't give people too much because then people will get complacent and not strive for anything, right? Like struggle obviously creates a situation for someone to improve themselves and all that and make more money and make things happen and whatever. And we have the freedom to do that. But nowadays it seems economically to be getting almost impossible for way too many people. It's always been impossible for some people, right? But now it's kind of like impossible for the majority, the major majority, the mass populace.
Yeah, whether it's healthcare costs or trying to buy a house as like a 25-year-old nowadays.
You know, I went, well, can I talk? I went to the doctor recently, okay? And
violating HIPAA here? Or
yeah, no, well, I wasn't, sure, whatever. But the point is it was more than a copay that I had to pay. And I was like, that's interesting. My health insurance usually used to cover this, but it doesn't anymore. And the reasons are, I'm sure, because of like Medicaid and all of these things that like I didn't vote for these things to be openly available to people who maybe aren't necessarily here legally. Like, you know, if I used to be involved with someone who was in the healthcare system, and they talked openly about how if someone who doesn't live here, doesn't have a green card, doesn't have a driver's license, if they show up at the hospital, you must treat them. You just must. And they get just as much of the benefits of the healthcare system as an American citizen who pays into their health insurance. And it's like, like what the hell is that all about? And I don't want to sound like that because it sounds like whatever, insensitive. But the reality is like, what's the point of paying into health insurance if everyone gets the same thing anyway?
Right.
You know?
Yeah. I've been getting a prescription for like acid reflux for like years. It's always like a $15 copay every time. And I go, I changed insurance recently, but it was still $15. And I go to pick it up, and the guy goes, "Are you aware of the price, sir?" And I'm like, "Yeah, why? What's up?" He goes, "It's $293. I was like, "What?"
What?
And he was like, "And yeah, your insurance also covers it. So whatever they covered, $293 is like what's left over."
Right.
Like, what?
Did you get it?
Yeah. I mean, luckily, like the pharmacist usually will scan their coupon and like get it to you for cheap. But it's this whole thing. It's almost hopeless where I'm like, okay, do I call the doctor? Do I call the insurance company? I know each of them is going to say, well, you have to ask your doctor.
Yep.
The insurance company is going to say, the doctor's going to say, you have to ask your insurance company. I'm like, I'm never going to get an answer.
Yep.
So I don't even know what to do now. I'm like, do I get another, generic version of the same pill that's cheaper that my insurance covers?
See?
It's so confusing.
And this is what I'm saying. The country's, it's falling apart. It's this feeling that inverted also maybe saying in that the table is tilted, right, towards the elite groups of people who run these companies and all that. And I don't want to sound like too vaguely conspiratorial, but like, because it's very like guy in a hat with a mustache with a beard talking.
Conspiratorial is a term that I hate because...
Yeah, well now it's not a conspiracy.
I mean, it literally means like a group of people conspiring. So when you define it like that, like it doesn't sound so shady, right?
Right.
Groups of people conspire to maybe, and it's not evil intentions, but they conspire to get a certain result,
right,
or a certain profit. Like so.
So the point of this book, I guess, is that like the whole thing of like, well, what are you going to do? That's what people in Nazi Germany would say. Like when they were doing what they were doing, they go, well, what am I going to do? Right. I'm going to go tell Hitler to stop.
Yeah.
What are we going to do? And America runs on this idea this propagandistic idea that we are the global authority of democracy and freedom. And it's like, are we really that free? And are we really that democratic? And are we really the global, example of what every country should be? Obviously not. Look at Afghanistan. That was just the biggest failure in the history of any military endeavor. I mean, we went there to overthrow the Taliban, and we did, right? But then
no plan after.
And we tried to westernize Afghanis and Iraqis, and they refused it. They rejected us, and then we left, and now it's in control of the Taliban again. So we literally wasted $6 trillion, killed 300,000 innocent people. God knows, well, that's the bigger
Americans,
number, but
right?
How many? No, Iraqi, Afghani civilians,
That's
right?
Like 1 million.
Well,
but
between the between the Taliban and the American soldiers' conflicts, the friendly fire and the casualties of war, they were accidental, but they still happened nonetheless, right? And like now they're back in control of the Taliban. We did absolutely nothing. Over there except just prolong the inevitable, right? Like there was a guy on Chris Williamson recently who's an English ex-politician, novelist, author, and he was talking about how he was in Afghanistan in the 90s during the Taliban rule, and it was basically run by religious leaders, priests, clerics, all that. And people wore traditional garb, right? Women didn't have all that stuff. And when we showed up, the only thing that really changed, he said, when he went during our occupation was people wore jeans and T-shirts. But things were still terrible for them. In fact, arguably worse because civilians were in trouble. They were in direct danger with the firefighting and all that stuff. And now it's back in the hands of the Taliban, and people are back wearing religious garb. And he actually talked to Iraqis, and he asked them how they feel about the recent exodus of our military and the Taliban regaining control of the country. Mm-hmm. And they were like, well, they're not the nicest people, but at least I don't have to worry about getting shot or blown up. You know what I mean? Like it's actually kind of a safe place to be now, and it hasn't been for 20 years.
Wow.
So, we try to impose ourselves on the world as this like authority of like what the way things should be. But we did this in Vietnam, right? We did this in Afghanistan.
I mean, it's failed
It's failed how many times? And like we just keep doing it, and it's all in the name of democracy and freedom. But realistically, it's in the name of money for the military-industrial complex, for the elites, for the politicians, for the people who make money on the back end of these decisions. And while we pay $256 for our heartburn medication, it's not really a democracy.
You just got to stop having spicy food. Get off that medication.
Kyle, you have a choice. No one's making you eat bread. No one's making you do that. And it's, but then they shove things down your throat with commercials and all this stuff. So like, look, I don't want to make it sound like we're stuck in some like dystopian, situation, but like Tim Dillon's coming out, and he was the one who recommended that book. I don't know if I mentioned that, but he was the one who recommended that book, Democracy Inc. And he's coming out with a Netflix show.
I know.
And if you watch the trailer, it's literally like, hey, America, your country's fucked.
Yeah. It's like a Jerry Springer, but like, But
for like current like relevant American issues.
Yeah. That's interesting. I want to switch to like a lighter topic.
Sure. Sorry.
No. Something I thought of the other day, and it just made me laugh, and I felt like it was a good podcast topic. But I was on a walk the other day with my wife and took an edible, and when you're in that perfect edible zone where you're not too high, but you're just thinking about like random things. And she wanted to have like a kind of a couple like talk, discussion or something like that. And I just like wasn't in the mood for it. Like wasn't really interested. I didn't really know what she was like getting at. Like, what do you want to talk about? Like, if you want to talk about something, like ask me a question, I'll answer whatever. And I realized in that moment where I was like, you know what?
That's what weed does.
I said,
opens those doors.
What if you did a top 5? So we were talking about, my wife is pregnant, and she wanted to talk about like, what are we going to do when we have the baby, all these different things. And it was just like an overwhelming conversation for me. So I was like, yeah, but what specifically do you want to talk about? And I said, well, what if we did a top 5 things that we're most excited about?
Okay.
And then instantly my whole mood changed.
Yeah.
Where I was like, before I was like, I don't want to talk about this. And I was like, top 5? Oh, let's go.
Yeah, that's a very man thing.
Number 5, I was like, oh man. Honestly, just cuddling with it, and I just instantly got so excited.
Yeah.
And she was like, what the fuck? She's like, all you had to do was like
add a top 5
to it. And I was like, yeah. I was like, guys are simple. I was like, you put the top 5 to anything, I instantly will be down. If you
top 5 sock brands.
Oh man, let's go. The champion, you got
Hanes?
Put in there. Hanes, undefeated.
Gold toe.
Yeah.
Unreal.
Like I was just dying laughing because I'm like, I told this to a few of my guy friends. Like, oh, it's so true.
It's a psychologically satisfying thing. The top 5, the top 10, whatever.
So now I do it all the time. Whatever she wants to talk about, I'm like, all right, top 5 choices for dinner tonight. Mm-hmm. Right, you got to rank them.
I think we just like games. Yeah, just making a game out of anything is so much fun.
And it's what like I'm sure you see like the Barstool guys. They do the like Mount Rushmore of things.
Sure, top 4's fun too.
The Mount Rushmore of sandwiches, or like the Mount Rushmore of like office jargon or something. It's funny. I saw a top 5 recently. I forget if I sent it to you on Instagram, but it was top 5 stretches of a comedic actor. Stretches of like 5 years of success, or so of like just knockout hits.
And I already know the best.
Well,
in my opinion.
List I don't know all the names of movies, but the list was like honorable mention was Bill Murray in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah,
like Caddyshack and Ghostbusters.
Okay, we're talking comedic actors too.
Stripes. That's what I mean.
Okay, actors, not stand up
actors. Sorry.
Got you. Okay.
5 was Vince Vaughn, maybe, where he had like old school Wedding Crashers.
Sure.
Like he had a ton. He had a huge stretch of that time. 3.
So wait, I'm sorry. 5 is Bill Murray. 4 is Vince Vaughn. 3 is who?
3 was Jim Carrey. Yeah, which
I completely disagree with your list.
This wasn't me. I didn't make this list.
Oh,
it was on Instagram. Some guy was just like ranking.
Okay.
Jim Carrey, which was like what did he do? Ace Ventura, Dumb and Dumber.
Dude, first of all,
The Mask in 1 year.
1 year, yes. I was just gonna say he came out. He was the first actor, comedic or not, to have, I think two consecutive 2 movies in the. Wait a minute. It was some insane Tiger Woods stat of like 2 number 1 comedic films at the 2 number 1 films at the same time or something like that with different genres. I think it was like The Truman Show and something else or something. I might be completely wrong about this, but he broke some record as far as acting is concerned with his top movies. And it was 95, I think, was his big year, 95. Okay.
2 was Adam Sandler.
I mean, he's still rolling.
Yeah. So
he's incredible.
That's a good number 2.
He's a feel good. Like if I ever just feel like having a nice, funny night, like you said, take an edible, smoke some weed, have a beer, and just laugh, always him.
Adam Sandler's the best at that.
He's the man.
Yeah.
I respect him very much.
Number 1, I definitely disagree with, and so will you, but it was Eddie Murphy, and they argued that he had 2 stretches. One was in like the early 80s, which was like Beverly Hills Cop and Coming to America.
Yep.
Which, I mean,
hilarious.
You can't really argue with.
No, dude, Trading Places with Dan Aykroyd, fucking hilarious.
And then they argued his second stretch was like Dr. Dolittle and stuff, and I'm like, I don't know if I count that.
Can I just say something? No, Dr. Dolittle sucked. There is a great scene, though, where he's doing an operation on the tiger, and he gets it very heartfelt, but there's a scene in Trading Places with him and Dan Aykroyd in the very beginning where he's still pretending to be this homeless guy with no legs. And he's like rolling around on like on a dolly, right, with a blanket over his existing legs. And he goes up to some woman. Mind you, he's a homeless man with no legs, and he starts hitting on this woman. And she obviously doesn't give him the time of day, right? And he goes, "We can make it, baby, me and you bitch!" Like, because she's walking away. And dude, I swear that. He's one of those guys, the way he says it kind of thing. The way he says that is the funniest thing ever, man. It's so funny. Because he was just courting this woman. Yeah. And he calls her a bitch. Like, because she won't, go on a date with this legless man. Homeless, legless man. Fucking hilarious movie. Funny.
I miss good comedy movies, man.
Yeah. It's a shame that we can't. And it's a shame that now, like, people have to make it a thing that they're making a comedy. Whenever someone makes a comedy that's like the old days where like it's a little like, off kilter and, off color and whatever, they have to make it like we're making a comedy like we don't give a fuck what anyone says, and like we're really going for
Rated X.
We might even say a racial slur or two. Like it's like, dude, comedy just used to be funny.
Yeah.
It just used to be funny.
We inserted one racial joke and one transgender joke.
Yeah. And there's a black guy in it, so it's okay. I have to say, Seth Rogen should be on that list.
Seth Rogen,
love him or hate him, but
that's
dude, that rush of like Knocked Up and Zach and Miri Make a Porno, Pineapple Express, and all that, dude.
Yeah, he had a good run.
I mean, one of the greatest.
Count, what's the Jonah Hill movie?
Superbad.
Superbad.
Yeah,
he wrote that.
He wrote that. Yeah. Dude, I mean, forget it. Seth Rogen literally was our high school.
That's a good nominee.
I think so, because there's that line that Craig Robinson has in Zach and Miri Make a Porno. It's one of the funniest things I've ever heard someone say. He's a barista, and he's taking someone's coffee. He's having a conversation with somebody, and some guy is behind this conversation, kind of getting annoyed that they're taking their time, and he wants to order his coffee, and he goes, he's black, Craig Robinson, and this guy's white. And it's just funny. Everyone already knows what's coming. And he goes, "Can I get a coffee, black?" And he goes, "Can't you see we talking white?" You know what I mean? And then it just cuts. Hilarious. Yeah, very funny.
I actually just watched like a silly comedy on the plane. I was in Chicago for a work trip. Are you familiar with the guys? Please Don't Destroy. They're like a comedy trio. It's 3 guys. Please Don't Destroy is their name. And like during COVID on TikTok, like that was like me and Lauren's favorite channel. Like these guys would just make like little 2-minute skits in their apartment in New York City. And they were like a comedy group, and they were hilarious. They eventually got jobs writing on SNL.
Oh, no way.
So they do, like Andy Samberg.
Yeah, I love Andy.
Island, and they used to do like the digital shorts.
Mm-hmm.
These guys now, Please Don't Destroy, have like their writing room digital shorts.
Mm-hmm.
So like the celebrity that week will come into their writing room, and they'll like, make a skit out of it. So they made a movie, and it's got like Conan O'Brien in it and a few other like SNL people, and it's silly. Like I wouldn't recommend it to people. Because it's like it's like a shitty movie, It's like a
you wouldn't be like, you gotta see this.
Yeah, it's like an older Will Ferrell type movie,
right?
It's like, all right, it's okay, it'll make you laugh. But this movie, it was just a perfect throwback to just silliness. Like it was 3 three friends were like lonely and like kind of losers, and they go on this adventure to like a mountain to try to find a treasure together. Okay. And like they're reigniting their childhood friendship, kind of like Without a Paddle.
Yeah, I was
like
just thinking
a similar plot line to that.
Yes,
but it was funny, man. Like it wasn't like corny. I mean, there were some corny parts, but it wasn't like in your face corny. Mm-hmm. It was like just I had a few belly laughs in it, and I enjoyed it. It was a good plane movie.
Yeah, I mean, I gotta tell you, it's been too long, man, since I've laughed at a movie. Yeah, it's been too long.
Yeah, like I tried to remember, like, oh, were there any lines from the movie that I want to like quote to people? And I'm like, there were a couple really funny ones, but none that like stuck.
Yeah, it's obvious that people are hungry for it. Like, you know how I have some kind of like autistic memory of like movies, and like my sister she'll text me, be like, "Can you do that scene from whatever?" And
you're the only person where like, can you do the whole scene?
Because she's at work, bored, you know, and she's like, "Do that scene from Tommy Boy when he's got to sell that thing and he's in the restaurant and the waitress," and I'll do the whole thing and I'll send a voice memo, and she'll get it, and she saves every single one, and she's like, "Heath, these are literally like tonally on point." Like you say it in the same exact cadence and like frequency. And like, so my point is like, there's something to, you don't even have to be watching the movie, right? Like you can just hear this dialogue and you're laughing. Like comedy used to be shamelessly ridiculous, you know? And now I feel like there's too much of like an expectation for it to make sense or something. And like, that's why comedy can't happen, you know?
So can you do the scene?
Of what scene?
The Tommy Boy one?
I can do any scene you want. Name any Jim Carrey or Chris Farley.
Tommy Boy, the scene where it's like him and David Spade's final pitch, where like Chris Farley just gets desperate and like it's his last attempt.
Sure, I can do that. Let's think about this for a sec, Ted. Why would somebody put a guarantee on a box? Very interesting. Go on, I'm listening. Here's the way I see it, Ted. Guy puts a fancy-looking guarantee on a box because he wants you to feel all warm and toasty inside. Yeah, makes a man feel good. Of course it does. Why shouldn't it? You figure you put that little box under your pillow at night, the guarantee fairy might come by and leave a quarter. Am I right, Ted? What's your point? The point is, how do you know that the fairy isn't a crazy glue sniffer? Building a model airplane, says the little fairy. Well, we're not buying it. He sneaks into your house once. That's all it takes. Next thing you know, you got money missing out the dresser and your daughter's knocked up. I've seen it 100 times. So why do they put a guarantee on the box then? Because they know all they sold you was a guaranteed piece of shit. That's all it is, isn't it? Look, if you want me to take a dump in a box and mark a guaranteed, I will. I have spare time. But for now, for your customer's sake, for your daughter's sake, you might want to think about buying a quality product from me. You know, like, look, I don't know why I have these neurological connections that are still completely intact.
You've always been able to do it. It's crazy. You can do it with anything. You can do it with songs where you like play air guitar. You could like hum it. You could do stand-up comedy, movies. Yeah. You could fucking recite text from books.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
And you know what's funny? They say booze. Oh, it's bad for your brain. It fucks up your memory. I've been drinking nearly constantly for like 20 years, you know?
My question
is true.
But you've been able to do this since you were like 4 years old.
Yeah, it's a thing.
You could recreate an entire scene as a 4-year-old. I feel like you watched so much Jim Carrey as a kid that you, like from a young age, like you emulated Jim Carrey.
I wanted to be
the exact same facial expressions, body movement, like tone of voice. Like you were able to do every impression as like a 8-year-old, basically.
Right. Weird.
So I feel like that was kind of like your sort of training ground in a way of like why you also talk with a very loud voice.
Yes.
Very entertaining personality. And I think it was because you were just mimicking Jim Carrey.
Well, this is why, because you're about to have a child, right? So like, let's talk about screen time for a second, because there's this whole thing about demonizing screen time. And I think that it's one of these efforts, right, that is too generalized. Like screen time means that everyone thinks that anything with a screen now is terrible, even TV. Thing is, though, television, movies, shows, most shows, not all of them, are mostly social, actually. Because when you watch a movie, you watch it with someone else, usually, right? So you're laughing with someone. You're connecting with a story with someone else. Screen time being a problem is like the tablet at the dinner table playing a video game, playing Angry Birds or some shit. That, to me, is detrimental to kids' development socially.
No, I agree
but dude,
you.
movies,
I agree with
not
you.
at all.
You need that. They're social. They're like cultural necessities
right.
to a degree. I remember there's two examples I always share about this. Number one was one of my first jobs out of college. There was a Korean lady, like awesome. She was the coolest. She was probably, a few years older than me, but she literally like was born in Korea, grew up there, moved to the U.S. when she was maybe like 14.
Mm-hmm.
So like still spoke with like accented, but she was a 25-year-old in America, and she knew nothing
about American culture,
of like pop culture, global culture.
Right.
Like she like barely knew who like Drake was,
right.
and like had never seen Friends.
Oh my God.
Like had never watched an NFL game, and just like all of these like basic things. I remember I was like, "Oh, do you know the Beatles?" And she was like, "I think I might know like a song by them." And it's
was she like North Korean?
No.
Oh.
Just like I don't think she didn't grow up with a TV. She didn't grow up with a TV.
Oh.
But also she wasn't like interested in that stuff. And
right.
It actually, we were like, you realized when we'd go out with groups of like 8, and she was very sociable. And when she wasn't,
so nice.
And when she wasn't involved in the conversation, she was like curious and be like, "Wait, what are you guys talking about?" And it made me realize like having that social connection through movies and pop culture and music is sort of like a necessary ingredient to like, not to fit in, but just to like
have a relationship. People. I'm sorry, relatability with other people. Yeah.
Yeah. And the other example I use too is I studied abroad in Denmark. And pretty much everyone in Denmark speaks fluent English. Like they learn it in school from a young age. Like if you go meet someone in Denmark, in Copenhagen, and they look like totally foreign, and you say, "Hey, what's up?" They'll respond, "Hey, nothing much. What's going on with you?"
English is part of the thing.
Yeah. So, but it's Denmark, right? Like culturally, do you know anything about Denmark? Like I didn't know anything. They grew up
not one person,
not just speaking English, but they would watch American TV. They watched like Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, Saved by the Bell. They watched like That 70s Show. Yeah. So their humor with us, their sarcasm,
correct,
and
on
like
par.
Their lingo was totally on par, and we were able to connect with them way easier.
Yeah, see, like that's what I mean. It's not an antisocial thing, screen time, as long as it's not. There are these shows like Cocomelon, apparently. Like you need to watch out for that one because it's a lot of flashing lights, a lot of like crazy distraction colors, very colorful, very just vibrant, way too vibrant, not reality at all.
Overstimulating, yeah.
Exactly. And but like movies, dude, and like Miss Rachel and all that shit, that's educational stuff, dude, that's not screen time. Like, do not like, turn your kid away from every screen all the time so they can play with like a fucking piece of wood. Like, that's not the reality we live in anymore, right? Like movies, like comedy, they need to be involved. They need to know what's going on.
Yeah, like I watched The Sandlot, I think every single day for like an entire year. Right. Every day.
It's fine. Like it's fine. Like it's when they demonize a lot of stuff, and it's not necessarily that big of a deal.
It is like a I think I agree with you 100%. I'm making the same points as you, but there certainly is I think there's two cons to it, which is like now since we were kids, like the only form of media was TV. Right now with phones, like I think it's just the fact that you can travel with it is like a big issue. Yeah. You know what I mean? So it can almost just be like a silencer device for parents when they're in public with a kid.
Yes.
Whereas kids need to run around. They need to make friends. They need to fucking get lost in finding a closet that like they shouldn't be in. But like instead, the parent will just hand the kid the phone, and now they're just sitting idle at a seat by themselves for a while. So that definitely the phone I think is a big difference.
100%.
I forget the second point I was going to make, but
for example, the other day, my wife, I work a lot, right? Like I'm always working and whatever. And my wife was like, "Layla, what color is Sully?" He's a character from a Disney movie. And she said, "Blue." And she was like, "What color is Mike?" And she said, "Green." "What color is Boo?" "Purple." Like I never sat my daughter down and had her differentiate colors. Like I never had her do that. Miss Rachel did that. Like, so you just got to show them the right stuff. Like,
it's funny too when you start to see kids like they go from, speaking a little and like starting to put together little phrases and then maybe a sentence here and there. Yeah. And then once they start watching sort of influential shows and stuff, they start using the humor sometimes from the shows, and sometimes you have no idea what they're talking about, right? They'll just reference like a random like animal or object, and you're like, what? Like, what are you talking about? And you're like, oh, it's from the show they're watching. So they start like adopting it into their personality a little bit. So I think that is also like a cool ingredient because they can try on different voices and like senses of humors and see how people respond to it. Like my nephew the other day just like ran at me and was like, "You're a big baby." And I was like, what? I was like, I'm sure it's from like a show he's watching, right? And I was like, I don't even know what you're talking about. But I'm like, and now I'm toying with him and like
my daughter was at one point, like I saw her come out of a vagina. Like I saw that happen with my own eyes. It's insane. And she was so small and fresh and completely hopeless and helpless to the world, right? All that stuff, right? And then you realize like these people are going to start to grow and have their own lives, whatever. But like the other day, she held me. She held me. She was holding me while we were in bed. And she said, "Don't worry, Daddy, I got you." I was like, first of all, that's like gorgeously cute. But what the fuck? You just said a full-on meaningful sentence. Like it's amazing, Kyle. It's so amazing. It really is. Like, there's no word that can describe it, you know? Tim Dillon recently was talking on a podcast about how, like, you know, when you get older, I know it's getting late or whatever, but I don't really care. Do you mind?
No.
Because, like, I don't care. I want to keep talking about this. He was talking about how, because, you know, he's gay, and he's one of those people that put his career first, right? Of course. Like, he's extraordinary at comedy and podcasting. Of course he should do that. But he was talking about how he's pushing 40 and he's like, you know, as you get older, your values change, you know, and like you start to realize that like no matter how high you climb in the hierarchy of entertainment or whatever you're pursuing, you know, it's never going to make you happy. It's just never going to really make you happy. And the things that make you happy as you get older are your interpersonal relationships. It's your did you do anything for anyone else today? Did you do anything for your family? When's the last time you saw your niece or your nephew or your son or your wife, whatever it is? And I'm just so grateful that I have that, you know, and you have that. Yeah. You have something to really live for, right? Yeah, that's a beautiful thing.
I heard a beautiful like story, a metaphor that kind of brings home exactly what you're talking about, because it's true. It's like a very true message that you realize what really matters in life, and you can use a razor to a degree of like, all right, does this decision I'm about to make, you know, benefit those relationships and helping people and stuff like that versus status, you know?
Yeah.
But I heard a story about a like kindergarten class, and the teacher had everyone write their name on a balloon, right? So you'd write Keith on your balloon, I'd write Kyle on my balloon, and they let them go. And these were balloons that they weren't going to fly away into the sky, but they were going to go slowly, just high enough after like a minute where the kids couldn't reach them. They were in a classroom, so they wouldn't be able to reach them when they hit the ceiling. But they had time to like get them. So she said to each student, all right, I want you to let them go, run around like for a bit, and then try to find your balloon with your name on it. And all the kids, after a while, like they weren't able to find their balloon. It was taking them long. Like some kids got theirs quickly, other kids didn't, and like some were crying, and they were like, what? Like, oh, this game stinks. Like, I lost my balloon. Because they're kindergartners. They love balloons, right?
Yeah. Oh, balloons are everything, Kyle.
Yeah. So then the teacher said, all right, we're going to do a second game. I want you to let go of the balloons, and then I want you to help someone else find their balloon and give it to them. And the kids were able to find whatever balloon was nearest to them. And one said Elizabeth. And the kid goes to Elizabeth and gives her hers, and she's got a big smile on her face. And then someone comes up to him and gives him his balloon.
Yeah.
And the value of that was, you know, showing, you know, chasing what makes you happy isn't going to make you happy, but helping someone else will always.
It's so true, man. Yeah. You know, you'll find when your child's born that when they get a little older, the only thing they want to do is help you do stuff. Like they don't care about playing. If I'm cooking, she wants to help cook if I'm doing something, if I'm fixing the screen door, she's sitting there with me on the floor, like trying to help me. Like I used to say that, or I used to think that maybe people weren't innately good, and maybe some people aren't. Maybe I'm just blessed with a good soul in my life as a daughter, but like, she is so unbelievably helpful and caring, like genuinely, and she's too young to know the difference between the incentives of being that or not.
Yeah.
She's just genuinely like, I want to help.
Being present and acting.
Yeah. And I think that people, maybe I'm biased, but I think that people innately just want to help other people. And like, yeah, it's funny, you climb these corporate ladders and these hierarchies of whatever you're trying to pursue, but like, that doesn't bring you, it's a cliche, but like, it does, there's a thing going on in the culture now where people are kind of putting that stuff off, and that's been going on for a while. But I heard a really interesting statistic today that I'm sure not a lot of people will like, but 50% of 30-year-old women and younger don't have children right now. 50%. Mm-hmm. That means half the women in this country don't have children who are of childbearing age. And by the time you hit 30, you are for lack of a better term, geriatric mother, like specifically mother, not female, but like childbearing age. Technically 30 is like, hey, get going,
Right,
and so 30%, I'm sorry, so 50% of those women don't have children. What is it? 20% of them won't have children, and 90% of that 20% will regret it. So it's like, whoa. Yeah, because like that time has gone on long enough since the 60s when this whole idea of like, oh, you don't need a family, just women power and all that stuff. And I'm not saying that every woman should just be a mother and like not work. I'm not saying that. But there is a biological tendency toward the, preservation of our species where you have to have children. Well, and so my point is it's this kind of lie that everyone's been sold, that your career is the most important thing in like your success, but like it's just not that important in the end,
Arianna Huffington of like the Huffington Post, like big author, successful woman, she actually was well known when she was younger. She's now probably in her 70s or 80s, but for being a woman who chose to have kids first and then became a careerist. And someone asked her, can you have both? Can you have like a family and also be, a powerful executive woman, at the same time? And she was like, no, you can have both. You just can't have them at the same time. Or you can have it all, but you can't have it all at the same time.
Right.
Not both, but like a number of things. You can't have it all, but you can, but you just can't have it at the same time. So she chose to she was like, yeah, I chose to have kids and build my family first. And then once I felt comfortable there, my husband was comfortable with it. Then I pursued my career. She's like, you could do it the other way too. You could pursue your career and work till you're 40 and, build yourself a successful life and then choose to settle down and have kids. But you're likely not going to be able to do both at the same time.
Probably not. So anyway, pretty good episode if you want to wrap it up. I got to pee anyway.
Yeah, I'm good. I got to pee.
Let's wrap it up.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.
And, yeah, that's it. I always feel like we got to end on a thing.